Grab your AR glasses and measuring tape. It's time for architecture, coffee, and ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I'm here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. So hello, and welcome to episode 9. On this episode, I'm going to be following up on my interview 2 weeks ago with Chuck Conrad and expanding just a bit more on our data centers and design. But first, an apology, my last apology ever, I swear. No, I'm just kidding, it probably won't be. Now, if you notice, this episode is a little late, a lot late, but it's just the last week, it just so happens that last week happened to be my first public presentation of my thesis as it stands at this moment. And now it's finals week for me. So for my school, while we have discussed and presented in the small class, this was last week, the first time I was presenting it in front of my entire thesis committee and the rest of the college. So to say I was super nervous is a bit of an understatement. However, based on my feedback, I decided to wait a few days to kind of absorb the information and reevaluate how I'm going to push forward and where, hence me skipping a week. But I'm excited to announce that I am going to make it up to you. The next week or two, this week and the next week, I will be giving everyone bonus episodes in addition to my regular episodes. First is to make up for the missing episode, and then to celebrate that Architecture, Coffee, and Ink is actually now number 154 on the iTunes chart for a design podcast. To be totally honest, I never expected to even be in the top 500, much less the top 200 for America, not in the world. So I'm completely blown away. Thank you, everyone. Please continue to share. I have listeners on every continent except for Antarctica right now, so even if it's only 1%, I'm extremely grateful. Please continue to send in feedback. Let me know what I'm doing that works and what doesn't. I genuinely couldn't do without you guys. The bonus episode will come out over each of the weekends. Since my final is going through Friday, I thought that there would be nothing better than just nice, fun episodes to kind of kick off the winter term. Maybe something a little light and airy instead of denser episodes. We'll see what's going to happen. It's funny, one of my professors said I should do a TikTok too, but I'm really going to have to think on that, as I am not sure how going Gene Keys, it's a Victorian, is going to help. But I also know absolutely nothing about TikTok, as my last statement can attest to, so we'll see. Maybe we'll branch out into TikTok too. I haven't even really used the Instagram feed yet, so we'll see. Anyway, all that aside then. So again, this is a listener recommendation episode, and I am so excited to fulfill the request. I have to say, it was kind of funny trying to interview my dad 2 weeks ago. Well, I promise I haven't just been going through my phone book and asking random people to interview. He really was the best candidate to introduce the concept of IT. IT standing for information technology in this case. But for me, I always try to balance my knowledge of the topic with presentation and presentation style. So I try to avoid going into excessive levels of nitty-gritty detail. And it was a lot harder to avoid doing that with my dad than I realized, given how much he has talked to me about his career and has really been my introduction to technology and mechanics as a whole. So in light of that, we're going to be continuing the topic here and include just a few case studies and discussing data centers. But without further ado, let's dive into it. Remember, as always, check your sources, check your facts, and more importantly, check me. This is an entertainment podcast. This should not be your primary source of information unless, of course, I'm interviewing someone and it comes straight from their mouths, in which case, quote away. So my dad did a great job breaking things down. And if you haven't heard the previous episode, I really encourage you to stop and jump back to episode 8. It's all about IT. Don't worry, I'll wait for you. You did it? Great. So first and foremost, we need to cover exactly what data centers are and how they operate within architecture. I feel like the previous interview gave a great example of how IT covers it and views it. So to those in the profession that I've personally met, many IT professionals have mentioned how data centers are dead, but always with a caveat. Because honestly, it's a gross overstatement and simplification. The truth is, the original data centers, when they were first introduced, have evolved. So it's not so much that we have just stopped everything, boycotted tech, and given ourselves over to our robotic overlords. It's more that the evolution of the field has caused a shift in how IT views it and how we as students of architecture view it. I say students because in this case, it's an ongoing evolving process. It's an active field. So I think it's fair to say that as the field is actively unfolding before us, we're all students in learning. Because there is no end at this time. It's not a long since abandoned practice. I mean, some articles I was reading from Arch Daily were published this year on, quote, the impact of data production on everyday life, end quote. In the time that I have been in school, I have slowly noticed an increased interest in data as a whole, which is increased in proportion to lockdown procedures and the more we as a society switch to a remote work and education. Not to say that those options haven't always been available, but they have undoubtedly been dramatically increasing as COVID has dragged on. So at its most basic definition, and this is a direct quote from Technopedia, data center architecture is the physical and logical layout of the resources and equipment within a data center facility. Then the article goes on to list 5 aspects that it says all data centers need to include: network, computing, security, physical, and information. So I used this definition because it gives us a starting point to branch off of. So in the last interview, we also discussed several of these aspects. However, one of the things we also talked about was how that was a rather pretty list of 5 things, but it's pretty much a general introduction. There's a lot more that needs to be considered in designs, and some of which really has to be discussed in conjunction with the IT department. One thing I always remember being pressed into me was the need to assess first and decide second. And that sounds like a fairly easy concept, but the truth is many times people want to react instead of evaluate. It's just human nature, and in design charrettes, that's brilliant. You want to just react. You want to spitball as many ideas as you can, as quickly as you can, and then reassess and eliminate as needed. But with IT, that's almost the opposite. I feel like situations like this serve as brilliant teachers, and this is probably in part due to the fact that I have been leading a section all semester. But a lot of the times, I really encourage people, designers in particular, to place themselves in an uncomfortable position. Learn something new. Lean into your discomfort, because that means that you either know something is wrong and needs to be fixed, or you'll be able to come out with a new skill and mindset, as this discomfort means you aren't yet familiar with it. And before anyone does anything dangerous, no, I am not encouraging people to do anything dangerous. Please be safe, be smart. There is a difference between putting yourself in a new, unfamiliar situation and learning something new and dangerous. But that warning aside, I noticed when reaching this episode that the 5 points network, computing, security, physical, and information changed depending upon what the data center was that you were talking about, and more importantly, what clientele they were serving. So, a more public driven center often referred to the clients as individuals, where the data centers that were serving businesses, almost that business to business style, will have more words like storage systems and switches, routers, etc. While both seem to throw out buzzwords like confetti, the treatment of the topic crafts the conversations and often the architecture, particularly the interior design. Officially, there are 4 types of centers: enterprise data centers, managed service data centers, coalition data centers, and cloud data centers, according to Cisco.com. Altogether, Arch Daily refers to it as this, from this quote here, very utilitarian aspect of the built environment, and yet they compose a particular kind of infrastructure within the contemporary society, one that is fundamental to the development of everyday life, rarely discussed within the profession. These new typologies have more recently penetrated the architectural discourse, raising questions about the architectural significance and the design potential of the spaces sustaining the mechanics of today's world. And again, that's not my words. That's again a direct quote, because I am in a weirdly quote-heavy mood this week. But it brings up a good point, that this is both a new and rare aspect of the profession. And what is most interesting is how they oftentimes show up having an extra aspect of design. They will incorporate time and efficiency into the design. And this they that I'm speaking of is data centers in this particular case. With all of this goes back, this idea of time and efficiency, all the way to episode 7 about space. We have to inherently embrace the 4th dimension, but bring it into the real world application. So I'm aware that was kind of a rather dense sentence, but what I mean is that while IT is pretty much 4D, we as designers have to incorporate it as it relates to 3D. We have to design for the overlap. So I thought that with that exercise down, let's look at a case study. So one of my favorite data centers to study is actually a center that has been put into a converted abandoned mine. It contains roughly 145 acres of storage, What's so fascinating to me is that they actually use some of the underground lakes in the caves for cooling, which is rather brilliant. It is apparently roughly 220 feet below the earth, which is roughly 67.056 meters, if I converted it correctly. They have a super interesting and easy to use website, which honestly is half the reason I enjoy them. And it looks a lot like the entrance to Stargate. The Cheyenne Mountain entrance, which honestly, that just goes to show how much of a nerd I am, and I need to delete that part of the podcast. Anyway, since it is underground, it was exciting to see that they still considered both security and fire ratings. So this mine was actually abandoned in the 1950s. And the reason that I say that they considered both security and fire ratings is I have seen a project before that I will not name drop because I don't believe in blasting like that. Where the security was just kind of the natural conditions of the environment around it, which was not very secure and did become a problem eventually. So to see that they have taken so much thought into consideration into how they implement themselves into their situation is absolutely amazing. And I am being super vague on purpose because personally I found several articles talking about how they don't talk about the mine. And yes, I'm aware of the kind of hypocrisy in my statement there. But then the author said that the author of said articles would list, a very, very specific details that were not quotes from the actual company. And so since there's that kind of gap in what the company said versus what the author of the article was writing, I've decided to focus solely on just general public information. But back to the mine itself, apparently the miners used dynamite for expansion back when the mine was in active use. So if you don't know, dynamite allows for the rapid expansion, allowing for deeper digging. Dynamite wasn't invented until the 1860s by Alfred Noble. And while it allowed for the 5 decades of evolution that this particular mine experienced when it was in use, dynamite is also an extremely dangerous method, and if used incorrectly can destabilize the earth. Now, on the flip side of that, it also allowed for them to get past the sections of rock that they once couldn't get around. And then once the mine was abandoned, they moved it. As the natural materials and the conditions really helped with the needed conditions of the equipment. Like when you put your cell phone in the sun too long, temperatures need to be controlled and levels of humidity as well to provide the best conditions for the equipment. Now, obviously, some construction needed to have been done, and at one point they opened up the company to independent and exterior companies to apply to be housed there. One article said that they originally started with just those in the state and eventually moved out, or the state or territory, I'm not sure which, and then moved out to more global applications. And when I say that the companies were housed there, I mean more that their servers and information is being housed there. Now, I can't speak for the professionals. I don't know how many practicing architects listening have designed data centers, but as a student, I really struggled in the beginning of my education to understand the requirements of how much the 4D needs and depends on the 3D. Now, I am a big fabrication person and always have been, but 4D designs were always walled off in my brain in the beginning. Now I'm referring way back to the very first building I ever designed when I thought, okay, this is how I'll handle it. I will follow the codes and the measurements I find to a T, and I will be totally fine. I just need X amount of space according to the code in this for this particular piece of equipment and this number of people. But then in direct juxtaposition to that, I would walk straight out of the class and talk to my dad and understand everything he needed and how I needed to change the designs for him without consciously realizing that I was designing. And it took time and understanding to finally pull everything together and realize that architecture and design is not a switch you turn off in your brain. Like, oh, let's turn the tech brain off and the design brain on, or vice versa. To be completely fair to myself, I'm talking about the bloopers, that all architects have when they're first introduced to architecture, way, way, way back, not in the professional field, but like when you first get in that first class in school. But I imagine I amused quite a few people around me when I did. Instead, architecture is this living, breathing lifestyle choice. And it's the struggle and the argument of form versus function and how that leads design that captivates us. And now you know why we as architects walk around staring at buildings and taking pictures of infrastructure on vacation. We genuinely cannot help it, and we find our craft in everything. Or maybe more accurately, we admire the craft of everything. Like I've stated before, either in class or on the podcast, unfortunately, this semester is a bit of a blur. I think all art should be admired for its intention, even if you disagree with the success of its execution. To finish up, the Irish Pavilion in the 2021 Venice Architecture Biennial focused on data technologies as well. So Dublin and Ireland as a whole have played a huge role in data in Europe. So it's really wonderful to see the imagery that came up in the articles I was reading. Honestly, genuinely just Googled the entire Venice architecture as a whole. It's beautiful to see everything that's created. It was this particular project I'm referring to was commissioned by Culture Ireland and curated by the firm Annex. I only bring this up as a side note because if you have some time and want to do a deep dive into a new topic, this is a pretty good starting point. My episodes thus far have only been so long, and I really can't cover everything. But with winter break coming up, we're going to readdress that and see how we move forward. But thank you once again for tuning in. And once again, a big thank you to all of my listeners. And a quick call to action. Please rate and review, share with your friends, neighbors, and family, your professor, whoever you think needs some architecture in their life. Again, we have a Facebook page and a private group. Everything is finally under the same name, Architecture Coffee and Ink. And the answer to the question who the host is for the private secret group is Hollywood, just like the city. And the second question is your opinion. You can again find me, the website for the blog is architectureinc.design.blog. And the Instagram is Architecture Coffee and Ink, just like the email address. Everything will be down in the show notes. And you can also just email me directly at architecturecoffeeandink@gmail.com. All spelled out without the ampersands or commas. This week I will be manually uploading some of the stuff and catching up on life. So there's going to be the blog will be updated by noon tomorrow after the show comes out um at 5 a.m. And once again, be excited for the slightly longer episode that I'm going to be posting for bonus. I'll go ahead and let you know it is going to be on underwater design, and it's going to come out this weekend. But otherwise, may your coffee mugs be full and your inkwells never run dry.